Imagine you're standing in your house at 2 a.m. The lights are off. You know where everything is. The couch is exactly where it was. The doors are locked. The windows are closed. Nothing has changed. Then you hear a sound, just one. You freeze. Your heart speeds up. You stare into the darkness, trying to see something you can't see. And here's the strange part. You know you're probably safe. So why does your body react like something is coming for you? Because the thing you're afraid of isn't actually the darkness. It's the possibility hiding inside it. When you can see a room, your brain knows what's there. When you can't, it has to guess. And for most of human history, guessing wrong about something hiding in the darkness could have been a very bad mistake. But here's where it gets disturbing. Your brain doesn't need to find a monster. It doesn't even need evidence that something is there. It only needs one unanswered question. What if? And once that question appears, your brain starts doing something you probably don't even realize it's doing. It starts searching the darkness for an answer. Imagine going outside tonight and removing almost everything you take for granted. No streetlights, no headlights, no glowing signs, no porch lights, no phone flashlight, no security cameras, no illuminated windows stretching down the street. Now imagine that this isn't unusual. This is every night. For early humans, darkness wasn't simply the time when everyone went to sleep. It was a dramatic reduction in information. During the day, you could look across the landscape and see movement. You could identify an animal. You could see another person approaching. You could spot obstacles. You could choose where to walk. At night, all of that became harder. And that's important because humans are not physically impressive compared with many of the animals that once shared our environments. We don't have claws. We don't have fangs. We aren't particularly fast. Our advantage is largely behavioral. We see, we listen, we cooperate, we recognize patterns, we anticipate what might happen next. Take away the ability to see clearly, and you've taken away part of the system that keeps us informed. Imagine an early human sitting near a fire. The fire creates a small circle of light. Inside it, there is information. Outside it, there are possibilities. A branch snaps. What caused it? The wind? A small animal? Another human? Something larger? The person doesn't know. And that's the problem. The danger isn't necessarily the sound. The danger is not knowing what caused it. A system that helps you survive in that environment can't simply say, "Come back when you have more information." It has to react while the information is incomplete, and that may help explain something your brain still does today. Because when information disappears, your brain doesn't simply become quiet, it becomes suspicious. Imagine two people hear movement outside their shelter. Person A thinks, probably nothing. Person B thinks, something might be there. Person B stays awake. Nothing happens. Person B wasted energy. Maybe they lost sleep. Maybe they spent the night listening to the wind. But now change one detail. There really is something outside. Person A ignores it. Person B is already alert. Now the consequences are very different. This creates a strange problem for a survival system. If you react to every possible threat, you'll sometimes be wrong. But if you ignore every possible threat, eventually you'll be wrong at exactly the wrong time. So a threat detection system can be biased toward caution. Not because it knows something is dangerous, but because the cost of missing danger can be much higher than the cost of a false alarm. Think about a smoke detector. Imagine one that only activates after the entire house is already on fire. It would almost never give you a false alarm, but it would be useless. A better detector might occasionally react to burnt toast. Annoying? Yes, but you'd probably prefer that because the system is designed around an uncomfortable principle. It's sometimes better to be wrong about danger than late to it. And this principle didn't disappear when humans invented electricity. You can still feel it when you're walking through a parking lot at night. You hear footsteps. You don't calmly calculate the probability that the person behind you is harmless. Your attention changes first. You listen harder. Maybe you look back. Maybe you walk a little faster. And then you discover it's just another person going to their car. Nothing happened. But your brain didn't know that at the beginning. It was responding to a possibility, and that's the important distinction. Fear doesn't always begin with, "I know I'm in danger." Sometimes it begins with, "I can't completely rule danger out." And darkness is almost perfect at creating that feeling. You've probably done this. You're lying in bed. Your room is almost completely dark. You look toward the corner. There's something on a chair. For half a second, it looks like a person. You stare at it. Your brain locks onto the shape. Then you turn on the light. It's a hoodie, a jacket, a pile of clothes. Nothing. But here's the fascinating part. The hoodie didn't change. Your brain did. When the room was dark, your eyes had less information to work with. The shape was vague, the edges were unclear, and your brain had to interpret what it was seeing. Humans are extremely sensitive to certain patterns: faces, eyes, bodies, movement, potentially living things. That's useful. If something in the bushes resembles a person, you want to notice. If something resembles an animal, you want to notice. But a system designed to detect those patterns quickly has a side effect. Sometimes it detects them when they aren't there. A shadow becomes movement. A branch becomes an arm. A coat becomes a person. And this is where your brain reveals something important about itself. It doesn't always ask, "What is this definitely?" It can begin with, "What could this be?" That's a much more powerful question when you're in the dark, because once the possibility of a person enters your mind, you start looking for evidence. You stare harder. You listen. You compare the shape to what you remember. And now, you're no longer simply seeing the room, you're searching the room. That's a subtle difference, and it becomes much more important when the room itself is familiar, because darkness doesn't just make unfamiliar places scary. Sometimes it can make familiar places feel unfamiliar.
Think about your bedroom during the day. You walk in, you know where the bed is, you know where the closet is, you know the chair is in the corner. Nothing about the room feels mysterious. Now imagine entering the exact same room at 2 a.m. You turn off the lights, the furniture is still there, the walls are still there, the door is still there, but suddenly the room feels different. Why? Because your brain isn't experiencing the room the same way. During the day, you receive constant visual confirmation. The chair is there, the doorway is empty, the window is closed, nothing is moving. Your brain has evidence. At night, much of that evidence disappears. You still know the chair is there, but you can't fully see it. And knowing something intellectually isn't the same as constantly confirming it through your senses. That's why you might glance toward the same dark corner, then look again. Why? Because your brain didn't get the information it wanted the first time. You didn't prove the corner was safe. You simply failed to find a threat. Those are not the same thing. And this is one of the strangest things about uncertainty. Your brain can tolerate a known threat better than an undefined one. If you see a dog standing 20 feet away, you can evaluate it. You know where it is, you can watch its behavior, you can decide what to do. But if you hear something moving behind a wall, you don't know what you're dealing with. The possibilities remain open, and an open possibility is harder for the brain to finish, which is why darkness can make a completely ordinary room feel like a place where something might be happening. And once your brain starts asking what might be happening, your imagination gets involved. Your brain is constantly predicting the world. You don't consciously think about every step you take. You don't calculate the exact location of every object before reaching for it. You don't analyze every familiar face as if you're seeing it for the first time. Your brain uses previous experience to make sense of incomplete information. Most of the time, this works beautifully, but darkness creates a problem. It gives your brain less information. Imagine hearing a noise in the hallway. There are several possibilities: the house settling, the air conditioner, your pet, something falling, a branch outside, someone moving. Most of these explanations are harmless, but your brain doesn't necessarily treat them equally. The possibility involving danger gets attention, not because it knows that possibility is true, because it knows that possibility matters. And now something interesting happens. The less information you have, the more possibilities your brain has to consider. A dark doorway could contain nothing, or someone could be standing inside it. You don't know. A sound could be the wind or footsteps. You don't know. A shadow could be a coat or movement. You don't know. And that uncertainty creates an uncomfortable loop. You can't see, you can't confirm, you can't dismiss, you keep watching. That's why you can sometimes find yourself staring into a dark room for far longer than necessary. You're waiting for information. You're waiting for the brain to finish the story. But darkness refuses to give you the ending, so your imagination starts writing one. And that's when an empty room can become psychologically crowded. Children might imagine monsters. Adults usually don't. at least not consciously. Instead, the mind creates more realistic threats. Someone breaking into the house, someone standing outside, someone hiding in the hallway, something moving in the backyard, an animal near the house. The monster changes, but the underlying mechanism can remain surprisingly similar. Something could be there, and you can't see enough to rule it out. That's why saying, "there is nothing there," doesn't always make fear disappear, because fear isn't necessarily asking, "do I believe something is there?" It's asking, "can I prove that nothing is there?" Those are completely different questions. You can know your front door is locked and still check it again. You can know the noise downstairs was probably the house and still listen for another one. You can know there is nothing under the bed and still look. And if you've ever turned off the lights and then suddenly walked faster toward your bedroom, you've experienced the same thing. You don't suddenly believe the hallway is full of monsters. You simply don't have enough information to feel completely comfortable, so your brain changes your behavior. And that's where fear becomes more than a feeling. It becomes an action. Here's a behavior almost everyone understands. You turn off the lights downstairs, the room becomes dark, you start walking toward the stairs. Then something happens. You hear a noise, maybe nothing, but suddenly you walk faster. Maybe you even run the last few steps. Why? Nothing physically changed. The stairs didn't become more dangerous. Your house didn't suddenly become full of predators, but your brain has entered a different state. Your attention is now focused on what might happen, and moving toward a well-lit area reduces uncertainty. Light gives you information. Information gives you control, so your behavior changes. This is also why people sometimes turn on their phone flashlight when walking through a dark space. You're not necessarily afraid of the room. You're trying to restore information. You're giving your brain something it can work with, and once the flashlight comes on, the threat often seems to disappear. Not because you discovered the monster was gone, but because the uncertainty collapsed. The chair is a chair. The hallway is empty. The coat is a coat. The sound was the air conditioner. The environment becomes predictable again. And predictability is comforting. That tells us something important. Maybe what we fear isn't simply darkness. Maybe what we fear is losing our ability to predict what's inside it. Now here's the part that makes the experience even stranger. You can logically know you're safe and still feel fear in your body. Your heart beats faster, your muscles tense, your breathing changes. You become extremely sensitive to sound. You notice tiny movements. You feel the need to turn around. This happens because fear isn't just a thought, it's also a preparation system. If your brain detects a possible threat, your body can shift into a state where you're ready to respond. You don't have to consciously order your heart to beat faster. You don't have to tell yourself, "now I should pay attention to every sound." It happens automatically. That's useful when the threat is real. But in modern life, the same machinery can activate when the threat is ambiguous. A dark parking lot, a strange noise, an unfamiliar trail, a horror movie, a basement, a hallway at night. Your body doesn't necessarily know the difference between "there is definitely danger" and "there might be danger and I don't have enough information," so it prepares. That's why you can tell yourself, "I'm being ridiculous," and still feel your heart pounding. Your conscious mind may understand the situation. Your threat system is solving a different problem. It isn't asking, "should I be embarrassed?" It's asking, "do I need to be ready?" And that system is extremely difficult to turn off with logic alone. But if this system is so uncomfortable, there's an even stranger question. Why do humans voluntarily seek it out?
Think about Halloween. Dark decorations, masked figures, haunted houses, people hiding behind doors, sudden sounds. We deliberately create situations that trigger the same psychological machinery that once made darkness uncomfortable. Then we pay money to experience them. Why? Because context matters. In a haunted house, your brain can experience uncertainty, while another part of you knows you're participating in a controlled experience. You can leave, you can turn on the lights, you know there are actors. The threat is simulated. That allows fear to become excitement. The same thing happens with horror movies. A character walks toward a dark basement, the audience knows something is probably about to happen, but they don't know exactly what. And that's the key. Horror works by controlling information. You hear something before you see it. You see a shadow, but not its source. You know something is behind the character, but the character doesn't. The movie keeps information just out of reach, and your brain hates unanswered questions. So you keep watching. You want the uncertainty resolved. What was that? Who's there? What's behind the door? What's going to happen next? That's why some of the most effective horror scenes aren't the ones where you see the monster, they're the ones where you don't. Because once you see the threat, uncertainty decreases. And when uncertainty decreases, your imagination loses some of its power. The thing that scares you most isn't always the creature. Sometimes it's the 5 seconds before you discover what the creature is. And that brings us back to darkness. Today, most people don't need to worry about the same environmental threats that shaped human survival in the distant past. We have electric lighting, secure buildings, technology, transportation, communication, emergency services. Modern life has changed dramatically, but our nervous systems weren't redesigned from scratch when those inventions appeared. Evolution works through generations. So it's reasonable to think of some modern fears as possible examples of an older system operating in a new environment. But there's an important distinction. We can't look at one modern fear and say, this definitely evolved for one specific reason. Human behavior is more complicated than that. Fear of darkness could involve several overlapping mechanisms: threat detection, uncertainty, sensory ambiguity, learned associations, personal experience, cultural influences, and our tendency to prioritize potentially dangerous information. So the better question isn't, did evolution create fear of darkness specifically because of predators? We can't reduce it that neatly. The better question is, why would a human nervous system benefit from becoming more cautious when it can't clearly see what is happening? And that question has a much stronger answer, because when information is limited, being cautious can be useful, especially when the consequences of missing something dangerous are much larger than the consequences of being unnecessarily alert. In other words, your brain doesn't need darkness to be dangerous. It only needs darkness to make danger harder to evaluate. Now think about what happens the next time you hear a sound in the dark. Your first instinct may be to look, then listen, then look again. Maybe you move closer. Maybe you move away. Maybe you turn on a light. And if you still can't identify the source, your brain keeps the possibility alive. That's the strange thing. The absence of evidence doesn't automatically feel like evidence of safety. If anything, in the dark, the absence of information can make your brain more alert. You hear nothing, you look, nothing, you wait, still nothing, and yet you don't necessarily relax, because your brain can't prove the environment is safe. It can only say, I haven't found anything yet. That's enough to keep the search running, and this is why checking behavior can become so repetitive. Look at the doorway, look at the window, check the hallway, listen again, look back, nothing, check again. You aren't necessarily discovering new information, you're trying to achieve certainty, but complete certainty is almost impossible, especially in darkness. And so the search continues, until eventually the lights come back on, and suddenly the mystery disappears. The room becomes a room again, the hallway becomes a hallway, the coat becomes a coat, and you realize something uncomfortable. Nothing changed outside your brain, the uncertainty changed. Now we can finally return to the question we started with. Why are humans still afraid of the dark? It's tempting to answer, because darkness was dangerous for our ancestors. But that's too simple. The deeper answer is this: darkness takes away information. It reduces your ability to identify what's around you. It makes predictions less certain. It increases ambiguity. And when the brain encounters uncertainty in an environment where danger is possible, it can become more vigilant. It searches, it predicts, it checks, it prepares. Sometimes it makes mistakes. A coat becomes a person, a shadow becomes movement, a sound becomes footsteps, a hallway becomes threatening. Not because the hallway changed, because your brain's confidence about the hallway changed. And that is why one sentence explains so much of the experience. You didn't prove the area was safe. You simply failed to find a threat. Those two things feel similar, but psychologically, they're not. So let's go back to the house. It's 2 a.m. You're standing in the hallway. The lights are off. You know the house. You know the doors are locked. You know you're probably safe. Then you hear something. Your body reacts. Your attention sharpens. You look toward the darkness. And now you understand what's happening. The darkness didn't create a monster. It created an information gap. Your brain noticed that gap. Then it asked, what could be inside it?
And because your brain is designed to pay attention to possibilities that could matter, the question itself is enough to grab your attention. Maybe there's nothing there, probably nothing, but your brain doesn't need absolute certainty to become cautious. It only needs a possibility worth checking. That's the legacy of living in a world where information was sometimes limited and mistakes could matter. The modern world has given us electric lights, but it hasn't erased the machinery underneath them. That's why a dark bedroom can still feel different from the same bedroom in daylight, why you can still look toward the corner twice, why you can still turn on your phone flashlight, why a horror movie can make you stare at an ordinary doorway, waiting for something that isn't there. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part. You don't have to believe in monsters. You don't have to believe someone is hiding in the hallway. You don't even have to believe you're in danger. Your brain only has to encounter uncertainty and wonder what might be inside it. Because for a survival system, a false alarm is often cheap. A missed threat can be catastrophic. So the system learned a simple rule. When you can't see enough, pay attention. And that rule is still inside you, even now, even in your bedroom, even when the doors are locked, even when you know you're safe. So tonight, when you turn off the lights, notice what happens. The room doesn't change. The furniture doesn't move. The walls don't disappear. But your relationship with the room changes. You have less information, and suddenly your brain starts searching. Maybe you look toward the doorway. Maybe you check the corner. Maybe you listen for a sound. Maybe, for just a second, you wonder, what if something is there? And that's all the darkness needs. It doesn't need a monster. It doesn't need a predator. It doesn't even need a threat. Your brain only needs a possibility, because the darkness was never the real enemy. Uncertainty was. And when the lights go out, for just a moment, the ancient human inside you wakes up. And if you think that's strange, there are other ancient survival systems still controlling your behavior every single day, systems you probably mistake for ordinary human instincts. That's what we'll uncover next.